Hi,
Hello.
that was difficult to join, sorry.
No worries. It's always like that. I always tell people that you're out in the country and a data connection is not always the best. Uh, is it
No,
rain?
actually the connection is good. The connection is good. It's more a problem of I don't know.
Is it?
My Instagram app, something like that. No, it's
Okay.
fine.
Is it raining?
And it was yeah, it's starting to rain 2 minutes ago, unfortunately,
But you have a
but
really
it
good
won't be long.
you have a really good solution. I can still see the vineyard, so it's perfect.
Yeah, I'm in my car actually, which is quite good, and I can open the window so that you can see the vineyard if you want.
That's amazing. Just to pull up right next to the vineyard. That's awesome. Well, Guillaume, it's such a pleasure to meet you. We have not met, so would you just start by introducing yourself and your story with wine? I think it's in your face, so maybe tell us how you came to your current job.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, my family makes wine since quite a long time because I'm the sixth generation actually of a winemaker in the family. So it all started around 1850, something like that. Even a bit earlier actually, to be honest, when we deep into the genealogic tree in the family. So I'm a Chablis. I'm a Chablisian guy, but I was born in Paris actually.
Oh,
The the story is that my mom, who is the daughter of Michel, left Chablis when she was 18 to study, and she ended in Paris, where she met my dad, and when she had a career. And so that was me. I was born there in Paris, born and raised in Paris, and even with the first professional experience in Paris, nothing to deal with the wine at all, because I was working in a web agency,
oh, okay.
which doesn't mean that I'm very familiar with Instagram and stuff like that, because it was in the early 20s,
Okay.
the early 2000 actually.
Okay.
So so the web was not exactly the same as the web today.
True,
Okay,
true.
but I decided to come back here because at some point I was always I was I grew up with always with a feet in Chablis, working during the summer, during the harvest with my grandfather, during the vinification when I was 20, when I was a student. And then after that, I realized that it was a much more interesting job living in the countryside, making your own product, working with the nature, much more interesting than working in an office in Paris. And so I quit everything. I quit my job. I quit everything except my wife. She who accepted to follow me, and we moved to Chablis 15 years ago now.
It's so funny you hear that story so often that people want to go try their own thing and then you realize what you left and go back home.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah.
So it looks
So
pretty static with fog behind us. Will you kind of show us around and tell us where you are? And you can flip the camera with
yeah,
the
I can. Yeah. Um,
Guillaume,
in
it's sideways. Do you mind turning a little bit? There you go. Thank you.
like that.
Beautiful. Wow.
I'm in the Vaudésier area.
So
I'm at the bottom of our Vaudésier vineyards.
okay.
So this the wine that you see on the first is the vineyard of Vaudésier, our vineyard of Vaudésier. And then if I move like that, you will see the valley, the
Wow.
Vaudésier Valley, and which is a quite very nice area actually. And the particularity also of this area is that it's really hot in the summer. It's,
Hmm.
as you can see, it's a small valley, so it's
Hmm.
a kind of a heat trap actually in
Okay.
the summer. And so I like this place because, as you can see now, if I stop now, well, if you look clearly here, you can see that there is two slopes with a little path at the bottom,
Hmm.
but there are two slopes. One is facing north and one is facing south. So first of all, you can see that there are some Grand Cru which are north facing, which you could think that's not the case, because you could think that a Grand Cru and Premier Cru has to be south facing, but there are some exceptions.
Okay.
Here there is an exception, and while some other are south facing. So I like to come here because it's a good way to show you how the diversity of the wine of Chablis that you can have, because you can imagine that the grapes that comes from the south facing part are not exactly the same as the grain that comes from the north-facing part in terms of maturity, concentration, etc. Our vineyards are located on the north-facing part, which helps a lot to keep freshness, to keep minerality in the wine, especially in hot vintages like the vintages that we start to have now since a few years, and that we probably have more and more in the future.
How big is Val d'Isere, and how many families own property just in Val d'Isere, for example?
Val d'Isere is not the biggest of the Grand Cru, but the total size is maybe something like, I would say maybe 15 hectares, 10 or 15 hectares, something like that. And in terms of how many owners, I would say maybe there are something like 15, 20 owners, something like that, I would say. We are lucky to be part of them with a 1 hectare, a bit more than 1 hectare parcel, which is just here behind me. And yes, and it's quite a very interesting Grand Cru, I have to say, because of what I explained earlier, because of all its diversity.
Okay. So do you vinify, I assume you vinify the north-facing section separately? Or
everything is north-facing for us. 100% of our parcel is north-facing. So yeah, so we vinify everything. We blend all the 1 hectare is blended into one tank.
Okay. Wow, that's fascinating. So how does that translate to taste in the glass from, say, a south-facing slope?
Well, the south-facing part of Val d'Isere is more. They have to be more careful about over ripeness during the harvest, because at the end of the maturity, you can imagine that the ripeness goes much quicker in that part. So the challenge for them is to be careful of not harvesting too late.
I see.
While on our side, it's the opposite. We take our time, and the challenge for us is not harvesting too early. So that's quite interesting. So, but to give you an idea, when we harvest our parcel of Val d'Isere, in most of the time, the south-facing part has been already harvested maybe 5 to 8 days before.
Wow.
So which is quite big. It's a huge time difference for two parcels that are just separated by 100 meters.
Yeah, that's crazy. So I'm just kind of thinking, ideally a vineyard would want to have both so that your pickers could be used for the longer time rather than everybody all at once.
Sorry,
I was just saying that you would, or as a wine producer, you would want to have north and south to spread out the picking time, but you're all in the north.
No, that's in the north, yeah. From that parcel, yeah, for that parcel, yeah.
So can you tell, so I have a few, there's obviously some wine professionals on here, and the vineyard brands people say hi. Can you explain Chablis for people who don't know Chablis, and why it's different from other Chardonnay and why it's different from other Burgundy?
So Chablis, first of all, Chablis, as you say, Chardonnay, 100%, of course. Chablis is the northernmost part of Burgundy, because the vineyard of Chablis is roughly 100 miles north of the rest of Burgundy, the Côte d'Or, basically. So you can imagine that the soil, of course, is different. The climate is different. And so it produces a totally different wine. The main characteristic of Chablis in terms of soil, of course, it's what we call the Chimay region, which is the type of soil that we have here, which is roughly 150 million years ago. It was all recovered by an ocean here, and the ocean left, but we still have the sediments in our soils of a lot of fossils of seashells. That includes the famous Exigera virgula, which is a tiny oyster, just a few millimeters long, that now we can find now in our soil in terms of agglomerates of fossils of this tiny oyster. So I'll try to find a rock while continuing to explain you and show you. And so the climate also is different. It's a quite continental climate, which means quite dry in the summer and quite cold in the winter. Used to be cold in the winter. That's not the case anymore because the climate is changing. But we could talk about that for 2 hours. without
Yeah.
any problem. So that's the particularity of Chablis. So the Chablis, because of this weather, because of this soil, is a wine that is very often we use the word minerality to talk about Chablis. It's quite difficult to talk about minerality, to give a definition of minerality, because of course everyone has its own perception of minerality, as you can imagine. But it's a kind of a mix of salinity, freshness, acidity. That's to me the definition of Chablis. Chablis is a wine that has to be very clean, fresh, precise, and focused, and also with a very a very nice tension in the wine, refreshing wine.
Yeah.
Also, another characteristic of Chablis, I would say, is also its diversity of terroir. Because if you look at a map of Chablis, you will see that there are a lot of different valleys. Some are north, some are going north, south, east, west. So you can imagine a lot of different climates, a lot of different exposure, a lot of different soil diversity. And that's also this diversity we want to focus on when we make our wines. So how do we do that? It's very easy. All our wines are vinified exactly the same. We use only stainless steel tank. We don't use oak barrel at all. My grandfather quit with oak barrel 50 years ago now, because he wanted to preserve the freshness and authenticity of the terroir. And we work only with natural yeast. We don't use any selected yeast or anything that will go against the original terroir expression of the wine. And so that's make our particularities, that all our wines are exactly the same vinification. So when you taste our wines, the difference you will find between the bottles come exclusively from the terroir and not from any winemaking techniques. And for me, that's very important.
So it stays in tank until it goes into bottle? 100%?
Yeah, only tank until it goes to the bottle.
And
Exactly.
does,
And that's key meridian. I just found one.
nice, perfect. That's beautiful. What a treat
So
to
you can guess all the fossils, tiny fossils of seashells.
Yeah.
That are agglomerate, and that makes the rock.
I love it. Marquita, my friend Marquita is very happy seeing that right now. So, how does the Grand Cru spend more time in tank than a Premier Cru?
Yes, Grand Cru needs more time, especially in maturing. And so we bottle roughly our Grand Cru approximately 18 months after the harvest. While for the Premier Cru, it's more like between 12 and 14 months. And for the Chablis village, it's about 8 to 10 months. So that will be the main difference between because I said earlier that everything is vinified the same way. There is just one exception that you notice, is just the time maturing before the bottling, of course.
But what does that mean? Because usually when we hear of wine maturing, it's in a barrel and there's a slight oxygen exchange and barrel effect. What does maturing in tank mean?
Maturing in tank means there is a small lees contact.
Oh.
And there is even if we do less and less lees contact now because of all the climate change and the profile of the wine that we have now, and also it's a question of working more on reduction than working on oxidation.
Okay. So when you first learn wine, people always say no oak in Burgundy, oak in, say, California. But there is oak in Chablis in general, not with you, but in general.
Yes, there is.
What does the oak do then in Chablis? And you want to keep it minimal, so you still tell it's Chablis.
Yeah, the oak will bring, maybe in Chablis, the oak will bring roundness to the wine. The oak will also, as you said, will bring oxygen into the wines, and which we don't have with the tank. In the tank, we focus more on just the wine by itself.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned tension, and for me what makes a great wine is tension, and sometimes it's hard to describe that to people. Would you explain what tension means to you?
Good question. Tension means it's straight, focused to me. That's my definition. And tension also means that the more tension you have in a wine, it also means that it gives you a good idea of the aging potential of the wine. That's it. It has to be, I like Chablis wine when it's sharp and precise.
Mm-hmm.
That's the tension for me.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to explain that to people, especially as a sommelier at the table. It's hard to find words because acidity and bitterness and sometimes they're hard to say because people think it's a bad thing. But
Yeah, but when you talk about tension, you have to talk about the acidity. You have to talk about this minerality because it's all takes part of the definition of the tension, of course. And as you know, as a sommelier, you know much better than me that everybody has different tastes, and even more, everybody has different words to explain their taste. So it's quite very difficult, as we said earlier about minerality, very difficult to give a definition of minerality. I cannot give a definition of minerality. I think everyone has its own definition.
it's very true. I like to, a lot of people start a dinner party or a meeting or a gathering with champagne, but I think a real racy Chablis like yours is a really good way to start that off. And typically people always say oysters, but what food do you think goes well with Chablis?
Yes, okay. Oyster is typical, even if there is a debate on that, because sometimes Chablis has so much oyster taste itself that for some people it's not interesting to pair with oyster because there is no complementarity. And
Yeah.
sometimes I have to say that I have to agree with them, especially when you open an old Chablis with this typical oyster shell characteristic in it. To me, oyster is not the perfect match, maybe, but here in Chablis, everything that will come from the sea is a perfect pairing for Chablis. You can also pair Chablis with poultry, white meat, but it has to be very fine, delicate food because Chablis doesn't like heavy, spicy food. So
Okay.
it also works perfectly with Japanese food, of course. It works well with cheese as well. So hard cheese, of course. So you see, there are a lot of options to pair the Chablis.
Yeah, I also think that it's kind of like a slap in the face. It wakes you up, maybe between courses, or if you're kind of fading, it's like nice to have a glass of.
Also, yeah, sure.
I just read an article this morning about smelling the cork when you open a bottle of wine. What's your stance on smelling a cork to see
Oh,
if?
by smelling a cork, you know that the wine will be corked
And so,
because a cork that has problem, the cork stinks.
and it's because I've always taught don't smell the cork. You don't need to smell the cork. But my colleague at work always smells, and sometimes the wine smells okay, but then in 15 minutes you realize it was cork when you could have seen that from the cork.
Yes. So smelling a cork, it gives you a good clue about what you're gonna have in the bottle.
Yeah. Another question I want to ask is, what is something that people should know about Chablis that they don't know in general?
Wow, good question.
I need
Good
to.
question.
I call it out to people.
What they should know that Chablis is, despite the fact that Chablis is very old because it was planted in the second century by the Romans.
Okay.
Chablis is a wine that has a very complicated life in it, and I have to say that the Chablis that we have today has nothing to deal with the Chablis that we had 50 years ago in terms of appellation size, but also in terms of style of the wine. I think that if you open an old bottle of Chablis that back in the 70s, 80s, they used to harvest in October, they used to harvest wine that used to need a lot of sugar, a lot of chaptalization because it was not now. We work with perfectly ripe grapes. We do not chaptalize anymore. we still have decent acidity. So in terms of balance, the balance between which is one of the important thing is the balance between sugar and acidity. I have to say that the grapes that we harvest today are just perfect and much more interesting than the grape that they used to harvest back in the 70s and the 80s.
But is that due to global warming or to
Oh
science?
yes, global warming.
Oh, okay.
Only global warming, yeah, definitely.
And have you seen since you came back and are working at the winery?
I already saw some impact of the global warming. I already saw some changes. Definitely,
Wow.
things are going quicker and quicker. So the question is, when will it stop to continue to change? That's the question.
Okay. Do you
But
make a Petit Chablis? Oh, go ahead.
but as I said, yes, I'm quite lucky to be the generation working today and producing wine today with the grapes that the nature provides today.
Yeah.
The only thing I don't know is how it will be in 50, 80 years. I have no idea. But one thing is sure is that today in Chablis, it's really interesting.
Do you make wine in Petit Chablis?
Yeah, we make a small production of Petit Chablis, yes, which is just localized actually. So you have the Grand Cru here, and the Petit Chablis is localized just on the hill, just next to it.
And what's different about the terroir in Petit Chablis that it's a separate appellation?
So Petit Chablis basically is located more at the top of the hills or at the bottom of the valley. So it makes different style of Petit Chablis. Our Petit Chablis is at the top of the hill, on the plateau at the top of the hill. You don't find, you find much less Kimmeridgian. It's more like a Portlandian soil, which is another geological stage.
Mm-hmm.
So that will be the main difference. So, and Petit Chablis is much more fruity, very easygoing, fruity wine, charming wine, but not with as much complexity and depth and aging potential that a basic Chablis or even more a Premier Cru or Grand Cru can have.
Okay. When you mentioned that Chablis was planted in the 2nd century, it reminds me that the monks had so many centuries to really fine-tune things, even to the way a certain slope will get a row in a certain direction, maybe up or down, east, west.
Sure. Yeah.
How does your north-facing slope require, or 50, 70 years ago, the vines to be planted? Is it a different direction than the rest of Chablis?
No, here it was the same direction because also there is you have to consider the topography of the parcel and also the size of your parcel, you know, to when you plant. So here there is not everything is planted from north to south, or from south to north, depending on which side we are on the yeah.
We're almost at a half an hour, so I'll let you go now or very shortly. But what is happening in the vines right now, like the work and the maturity? What's happening in the vines?
So maturity this year is another very early vintage.
Okay.
The full flower was I would say about 8-10 days ago, last week roughly, which is quite early as you can imagine, because usually in Chablis full flower is around mid-June.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
So as you can see, yeah, it's really in advance this year. The reason is, as usual, the global warming, which means that we don't have any more winter, the same winter as we used to have. It's more like a long autumn, very long autumn. So the bud break is much earlier. So the spring frost is also much earlier, and the risky spring frost time is much longer than it used to be, which is the main issue in the vineyards of global warming, actually. So it's really in advance right now. In terms of grapes, it's quite generous.
Okay.
I have to say, yeah, so far. So we cross the fingers so that it stays like until the harvest. And now the work in the vineyard is mainly work of until I don't know the name in English. It's palissage, which means that you take care of everything is well. You take off everything that is too much,
Yeah.
and you make the rows are as thin as possible to
Okay.
optimize the air,
Hmm.
also to avoid any fungus disease development, even if this year the mildew pressure is not high at all. And the oidium pressure is going to be a bit sensitive to oidium starting in about quite soon now, but so far we are quite optimistic about the pressure of disease, which is quite good news. Yeah.
Last night apparently it hailed in Bordeaux. Do you have risk of hail for much longer?
We don't usually at this time of the year, it's quite the hail time. We had storm, but no hail
Okay.
so far, which is good. And so, yeah, no, this year we didn't have any hail.
And then my last question is just about Corona, how that has affected either the vineyards or business. I just saw that someone was saying we should have more 375 bottlings, either to leave as samples or for a lot of restaurants are carry out. Have you thought about that at all? And how?
No, no, I didn't think about that because I'm not a big fan of half bottles, to be honest.
Yeah,
I
me
pre
either.
I prefer magnums. And no, but I didn't think of that. And I will continue to produce as usual. And of course, the coronavirus, yes, it was a big hit for us because when you have basically all the restaurants in the world closing at the same time, so of course you can see it. But in terms of working in the vineyard, it didn't have any effect at all because working outside is totally different. So there was not this notion of a lockdown. We were able to work. It was a bit more complicated in the winery because it's inside. But at this time of the year, you know, the racking was finished and the wine was just maturing gently in tank. So we don't have a lot of to do in the winery. So for us, it did not disrupt a lot the work in progress that we have in the vineyards.
Is
Obviously,
is there at all a risk of because some wine might not have shipped, having enough warehouse space for the next bottling?
yeah, that can be an issue. That can be something that we have to deal with. But we are lucky to have a huge capacity in the winery because we can store 2.5 harvests in our winery.
Okay.
The good thing with tanks is that you can store a lot of wine and it doesn't take a lot of place, you know, because in terms of optimization of the volume, nothing is better than a tank. So far we'll be able to manage.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Okay. Well,
yeah.
I let you go unless you want to say anything before we part. It's been a real pleasure to meet you, and thank you for showing us the vineyards. It's gorgeous
You're
out there.
welcome. A pleasure to be with you as well. Pleasure
All
to
right.
be with you. So I hope everything is fine for you. All fine. It's the beginning of the day. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm gonna
And sorry, I didn't hear.
have a cup of coffee now.
Oh, yeah, okay, sure. So enjoy your coffee, and yeah, and if you want to do it again at another time of the year, it will be with pleasure.
I would love
Sure.
that. Thank you so much. It's
Yeah,
been a chat with you. Take care.
with pleasure. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye bye. Bye.